So a slightly different view at the Chateau this morning. A little bit of a different vehicle in front of the Chateau this morning, but I think it works quite nicely, frankly.
It does fit in rather nicely.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? We should get some photos of it with the Chateau in the background. Yeah, I like it.
We are incredibly honored and excited to have Sacha Dench and her team here. It's a funny story how this happened, but Sasha is the founder and CEO of Conservation Without Borders. I can't even say it, I'm fangirling so much. So
Me too, by the way.
maybe I'll let you do a little introduction about what your organization is about.
Yeah.
And then we can tell the funny story of how you're here.
Okay. Yeah, so Conservation Without Borders I founded on the back of an expedition I did from the Russian Arctic to the UK following migrating swans. But I did it by flying with them in a paramotor, so basically a parachute with a big propeller on your back. And from that, we use that to engage lots of different people in how to save swans over many different countries. And I was made UN ambassador for migratory species. They are kind of complicated to conserve and to carry out more of that kind of work, because migratory species around the world are some of the most threatened. We set up this organization. So the plan is to keep following migrating species around the world and use the journeys and the stories of not only the animals but also the people on the way to get people excited about helping us save them.
Which is kind of amazing. I can't even...
It drives me.
Yeah, it's exciting.
The funny story of how we met was that Sasha signed up for the newsletter, and the first newsletter that went out, it bounced. And quite often, if an email bounces, I just try to look it up and see if there's a, .com versus .ca or .fr error or something like that, a little typo that if I can find the person, maybe I can find their email and get it corrected. And so in that process, I Googled, and your name came up and all of your accomplishments and everything that you have done. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe she signed up for our newsletter. Yeah. And so I sent you a little sort of fangirly email going, you're amazing and I can't believe you're interested in what we're doing. And and so then...
And I could respond and explain why I was signing up to the newsletter, because I had, during COVID and beyond, I'd spent a lot of time watching your channel, also watching Chateau Diaries, and you started to talk about writing retreats and things like that. And I thought, actually, I have a book that I should have started writing 3 years ago. It's kind of half done now, and I was really interested in what you were doing there. And then to get an email back, and I was straight onto my cousin actually, who was the first person that put me onto your channels. And I wrote back and went, oh my God, guess what? They've just emailed me directly. So it was really amazing to have found that your chateau is actually en route to us coming back from the journey with the Ospreys.
Yeah, exactly. So you were following the Ospreys from Scotland down to Guinea.
Yep.
Right, and now you're just coming back with your team, who I would love to introduce too, but they're all roaming around the chateau.
We'll get them. We'll get them. Don't you worry.
Exactly.
They're around here somewhere.
Yeah. So so the Ospreys migrate back and forth every year, but the juveniles, they don't migrate the first year. So they are some of the most threatened. We lose 70% of them every year. So only 3 in 7 return to where they were born. And so we were really interested in also, once the adults have left, what sites are the juveniles using? What sort of behaviours are they there?
Right.
What kind of threats are there in that area? So we've been looking at some of those on the way back. But the main film that we've made is going to be about the southerly migration.
That's amazing. So there's connections with what you're doing with what happens locally, right?
Yes.
So we're in an area of the Perigord which is really known for duck farms and raising ducks. And we were, of course, impacted by the avian flu and as a bird flu as it's commonly known, right?
Yep.
And I think that's impacted your work as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's one of the things we've looked at. So on the migration, birds suffer lots of different threats, but there's a few that are really closely connected to us, and bird flu is one of them. So there are all sorts of international agreements on how to deal with pandemics, but we found ourselves on this return journey in Gambia, for example, where all those international agreements people have signed up to, for example, one of the requirements is that each country deal with their own surveillance and also their own response to a bird flu outbreak. What that means in reality, so I'm connected to UN bodies that are doing all the paperwork and the agreements, and it sounds great in principle. In reality,
I'm going to interrupt for a sec just to say, because you did gloss over that really quickly, but it is like you have a UN ambassadorship. You are a UN ambassador for migratory species, so I think that's got some clout behind it, which is nice.
Well, and I guess that what I tried to use it for is to raise the profile and create a voice for people along the flyway, quite often small groups who don't have much connection and aren't necessarily heard. So in this case, there were the groups on the ground. There were national park staff working at reserve staff, and there were staff and volunteers of a local bird organisation and bird watching organisations who were expected to go out and do the work, the surveillance. They'd go out to islands, find dead birds, etc., deal with those. But the reality in a place like Gambia is that they have no spare cash whatsoever.
No.
Salary is about £35 a month, so it's a fairly small amount of money. But the sort of boat fuel they needed to go out to one island, for example, was £24. They just didn't have a spare £24 around. I just overheard this conversation, and the more I dug into it, the more I realised that there's just a bit more support that needs to be given directly to people on the ground in order for them to deal with it. And why should we care about it? Well, the island, for example, that we were talking about is an island that's used by lots of birds going up and down the coast. There's ospreys there, there's pelicans there, there's terns there. And because it's a sand island that sits off the coast, there's an upwelling, there's loads of fish there, so lots of different species want to be there. But yeah, anything that happens there will transfer very easily back and forth between Europe and West Africa. A lot of birds. We've been following the osprey, but that's an icon for the hundreds of thousands of birds that are doing that same migration. So we just found an area where a bit of support for some people on the ground. They're smart, they're really capable, they're really willing. They just need a bit more of a hand. And when they were looking for advice on, things in the field are never quite what they are on paper, there was nobody they could call. They were being sent web links, and it's web links to some quite complex English. And whilst they speak English, it is a second language, and it's not exactly the same English, and it's quite technical language, documents of hundreds of pages. So they just need someone on the end of the phone, a bit of extra money for fuel, a bit of extra training. It's not that much.
And
really.
when we say a bit, like you said, 1,500 would go a really long way to protecting this or giving these people the boost they need to do their local work. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of throw a shout out to the Chateau community and see if we can come up with those funds for those people, because it happens globally and it impacts locally. So it's
absolutely,
we're all concerned about it.
And they're really willing, and we've been in constant contact with them since we left as well. And that sort of echoes in a couple of other areas as well, where we think the issues feel like they're a long way away, but actually they're connected, and we can have much more impact, not even always with cash, but with other influence. So one of those is Morocco. Morocco's got a vast area of desert, or Morocco and what was Western Sahara. It's actually a third of the whole migration route between Europe and Africa. So they're losing a lot of their wetlands quite quickly, but the Sahara is being eyed up as an incredible resource for renewable energy. It's got winds all through the night, it's got sunshine during the day, so there's constant supply of power. The one thing is, because it's another migration bottleneck, if they build a power line network that takes all that renewable energy into the grid, there's a big development that's planned for the UK that will take all that power by undersea cable to the UK. If they build those pylons and the power lines in a way that birds will not see them or be electrocuted on them, then we have a massive problem. But it's not a big deal at the beginning of a project to make sure that they're pylons that cannot electrocute birds. And you might think, God, the Sahara Desert is huge. Why is it that birds are going to end up on those power lines? Well, if you have a desert and you've got birds of prey on migration, and you build a tall structure where there are no trees, every bird that's going through there is going to want to perch on that tree as a place to look, observe, to hunt. And when there are rains in the Sahara, life bounces back. Just by building the pylons, you will attract birds, and an osprey, for example, will use a perch, if it's caught a fish, to go and sit on the top. And also because the fish makes an extension of its sort of body, you have an added...
It's going to cross the line, so for sure,
Exactly. And we have really tangible examples. So in Urdabai, which is north of Spain, just south of here, they had 11 birds tagged, I think, of juvenile birds tagged, and 8 of them were electrocuted before they made it south on their migration. So it's a big issue, but one that we can fix. The thing we noticed from being in Morocco is that with politics in Morocco as they are, it is very difficult for locals to have an influence. But if there are English or British companies who are building those developments, we can be that influence, but from afar. But we would never have known that if we hadn't gone through the area and spoken to people to understand why aren't pylons being built in this way. So Yeah, there's other issues. And another one that came up on several occasions with groups in West Africa that are looking after areas that our birds are spending their winter in, was that the model they have is that tourism is the main funder for any conservation work.
Right.
And it's normally the on-ground stuff is being done by locals. But their conservation work is voluntary. They only get paid if tourists come. And they said 2009 was the first crash, the financial crash, meant people weren't going to exotic places, I suppose, like West Africa.
Yeah.
And then COVID again. And so some areas just don't have anything at the moment. So if we can help them to bring back a bit of tourism, and looking at the kind of salaries we're talking about, it doesn't take many tourists to go to an area, as long as they stay for a while and spend a bit of money and do boat tours or whatever. That can be a massive boost to conservation. So
can you give people a couple of names of places they could look up and see if they're interested in going, and reassure them that, because Western bias and everything like that, we tend to put Africa under one giant umbrella, and people have different perceptions. So
Absolutely.
it's if you name a couple of places and reassure people it's safe, because everyone lives there.
Well, the coast of Senegal, there's a site in the north called Langue de Barbarie. They have got a great setup there for tourists. You can stay at there's a kind of a campsite option with accommodation, or the local reserve wardens have accommodation as well. It's kind of basic, but it doesn't take much basically staying there. You will be funding a group of people from the local village will run the accommodation, they run the boat trips and everything else, and they are passionate, experienced, knowledgeable conservationists as well. So if they have that little revenue, that means they don't have to spend their days fishing and making the tiny kinds of incomes they have to keep the family going.
Right.
That will fund them to be able to go out and spend more time doing observations. And a site like that is so important for ospreys, for example, because it's got a big sand spit that comes out. There's the land, there's a big area of water that's protected, and there's a big sand spit where the ospreys are very undisturbed. And so the juveniles, at the moment, there's 8 juveniles there who are spending their time there fishing. There's plenty of fish, and ospreys will avoid disturbance, unlike in other parts of the world. So in the Americas, for example, they've never been persecuted like they have been in Europe. So they're much bolder around people, but ours are not. So a couple of the sites in Senegal, they will all be the same, actually, all the coastal sites there. And also in Gambia, if we can tackle the bird flu issue there, the revival of tourism there will make a massive difference.
Oh, very cool. You have such an interesting story, because you started in marine biology and you've just developed into this, and then the UN ambassadorship, and then you're the world record holder for the first person to cross the channel in a paramotor. But
that was a story which came about when I landed on UK soil after that trip, and that's what the British media had to say was, "Oh my God, how does it feel to be the first woman to cross the English Channel?" I had just flown all the way from the Russian Arctic, and I was left going, "You what?
What happened?"
That was a few kilometres across water, but the Russian Arctic was kind of more interesting. That they wanted to know about the crossing of the channel, so that was good. You have led a full life. And still optimistic about what we can do for conservation, which is great. We tend to hear, unfortunately, a lot of the negative things, but there's loads of positive going on out there as well. And that's why I find these expeditions with birds, the most inspiring thing for me is that it doesn't take that much if you raise the profile of some local people with a good idea, but maybe no power or not enough money, you can give a massive boost to conservation. And if they also feel connected to lots of other people, some will start an idea and just think, but I'm doing a tiny little part of a big picture. Actually, if you can share all their stories and they go, actually, I'm part of a much bigger thing, and I can now see it, actually, together this can make a difference. But just like me on my own, am I really making a difference? And
well, that's it. And this feels really, at least for me, in talking to you over the last day or so, has felt really approachable, right? So the same thing. You kind of sit here as
it's not rocket science,
right? Mm-hmm. You sit here as a privileged Westerner and you're like, oh my gosh, the problems of the world are so big and I want to fix them all. But this is a really fairly easily acted upon change we can make that would actually really have a big impact. And as you say, connect. The ripple effect of it, I think, would be really effective. So that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. And also over the years, it's nice to be able to look back and go, oh, there was that one kid that actually showed some potential, and look where they are now.
Yeah.
As well. That's the other thing that I've found really inspiring, that
Yeah.
if you just give people a boost at the right moment.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So we can do wildlife and the
Yeah.
lifting people up, which we love
Yeah.
doing. We love a win-win around here,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
conservation is
Yeah.
all about people, and it's not rocket science. I'm kind of, I beat up on conservation a bit because it does tend to be run by scientists who tend to kind of be so expert in what they feel that the piece that they see is quite complicated, and they're quite often not, they're the best people to be identifying where the problems are, but they're very rarely the best people to be solving those problems,
Right.
because they're either too close in an issue, or they don't understand the kind of world they're trying to change,
Yeah.
and have this deep rooted belief that the pure logics of publishing data on something being a problem and will mean that people will respond and go, okay, we're going to fix that.
Yeah.
But actually you need to touch a few kind of hearts and minds, and influence a few people, and that's how we actually develop make change happen.
That's amazing.
And
Well, we'll have to figure out how to turn 37 acres into a safe space for migratory species.
Yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
See what we
have
can
any,
do.
like, immediate top tips for a place like this? Because we're not actually directly on the Osprey route here. You said it's kind of
you
all
should be.
around France, but we should be.
There should be ospreys all across France. So
Okay.
France, like many other countries, built fish farms, attracted all the ospreys there and persecuted them, but that happened in the
Right, yeah.
1800s.
Okay.
UK had no ospreys left, or as good as none. Maybe a couple of birds had clung on in Scotland. So there should be ospreys all across, and they certainly are migrating overhead. But the key things, I suppose, are creating. Well, if you're talking ospreys specifically, the one thing that they have struggled with, certainly in the UK, is needing big old trees to nest in, because they like, quite specifically, a tree where the top has kind of fallen off and it's made it kind of, it's got a natural big base, because they like a big sort of platform. So all around the world, people make platforms. If you make a platform, quite often ospreys will come and observe, and within a month or the following year, you'll find a nest starts being built there.
Okay.
But they tend to, the problem with the dispersal once they've gone is that they tend to come back to the area that they were born in.
Okay.
So if their parents are still alive, they're going to be looking for that nest, or
Right.
struggling to find another one, and they're not very good at creating one from scratch.
Okay.
So if you want to recolonize a completely new area, then you tend to have to build platforms.
With mostly the nests already in place, or
you can. Well, all this information is published online, because it's quite a thing in the UK to build osprey nests.
Okay.
But yeah, there are descriptions of how to do it. I don't know what French legislation is on whether you can just go and do it, but Brits have just decided to start doing it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Whether they should or shouldn't, just because we need to have wildlife back. But you do sit right in between two reintroduced populations of ospreys. So one down in the Marais d'Ox and one about 100 kilometres north of Limoges.
Okay.
So there will be ospreys on occasion flying overhead, and you can hear that make quite a distinctive, piercing kind of cry.
Okay.
And that kind of white face and the dark sunglasses make them quite obvious.
Right.
But you are on a migration route of lots of other birds. I've watched the crane spectacles coming past, and the key thing that they quite often need is areas of water with open land near them.
Okay.
Birds will quite often look for that, and allow insects, as insects are the kind of base of the food chain. So less use of pesticides everywhere makes a massive difference. Let wildflowers grow, because all of that is the base of the food chain, which everything else sits upon. So yeah, they're the key things, really.
That's awesome.
Yay, less gardening. I mean,
Stop mowing immediately.
no, that's good advice, though.
You need a bit of everything, because there are certain birds will only basically be able to eat in areas of short grass. So if you look at where in the UK we've got kind of a nature reserve that people are now, they've been encroached on. There's less and less wild space. The conservation teams have to try and manage that land for all different sorts of species, which means they have to try and keep some areas of short grass, some areas of medium grass, some areas of high grass. It's quite complicated. They wet and they dry and they wet and they dry, artificially trying to make sure there's land for waders to eat from. So really, the more nature you have, the more that does it for itself.
Right.
And but yeah.
You're not off the hook, Sarah.
Ah, darn it. That's okay. I do find when I mow, particularly the field up to the west of us here, the birds. As soon as I've mowed, there's a whole bunch of birds that love to feed
lots
on
of
there.
birds
So
will love it.
yeah.
And there are some times of year, if you get birds which are nesting in fields, try and make a point of driving slowly and looking out for them, because there are surprisingly some that will nest in high grass.
Right.
So we had a crane in the UK, a farmer kind of distraught because he'd driven over one without realizing it. And other farmers, I did a flight in an electric paramotor around the UK, and we had a guy there that used to have somebody come out with him because he'd done it once. He'd hurt a bird, so he used to have someone come in front when he was mowing and run through the fields basically to make sure that anything that was there would be disturbed beforehand. I'm not suggesting you need to do that as long as you're not on a massive tractor, are you? And you're mowing the grass.
And we do keep a part of our lawn as tall grass. We've cut some trails through it, but we want to keep it kind of natural for that reason.
Yeah.
We've got lots of deer and boar and other things wandering through, so it's it's nice to have
pays
that.
you back in spectacles as well.
It does.
Definitely,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah, being observant to it. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
the bird song here.
thank you so much for coming, and thank you for all the awesome work you do.
Thank
and
you for having
we
us
can
in.
help you that much.
For anybody who's watching, this is where my team have been sleeping for all the way from Guinea. So we've been 7 weeks living out of a 4-wheel drive that's got a pop top on top with a tiny bed on it, and it got washed yesterday because we had rain, but otherwise it has been filthy. And we've had pretty basic living conditions, and then I only dropped it on the team the day before we arrived that we were going to a chateau, and they didn't really know. I said it's a chateau under renovation, so they thought it was going to be another ruin that I found for us to park in. And last night we ended up being treated like kings, so thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah,
Least we could do.
yeah, very, very happy to have you here.
Yeah. Should we go see if we can find the team and introduce them?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
Let's introduce you to the rest of the team. So this is Paul. And what's your role in this expedition?
I've been driving this beast
Right.
on a daily basis, and I do photography, some camera work. I guess I'm the team medic at the moment as well. I have a background
In medicine?
well, not in medicine, but I was a medic in the army
Oh, okay.
for a couple of years. So
Fantastic.
yeah,
Feel very safe.
I do a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And I'm Tim's gopher when he fixes the vehicle.
Right. So Tim's the guy who keeps everything moving.
Yeah, keep repairing.
Yeah.
I break it, I fix it.
Well, that's a good way to be, I guess. Particularly when you're out in the middle of nowhere, I'm guessing it could be a challenge.
You have to do what you can.
Yeah, exactly. And finally, we got Kat here as well.
Hiya.
And what's your role in this whole?
So I do all the communications. So anything that you're seeing on our socials and behind the scenes footage, that's basically what I'm doing.
Awesome. Well, you're all very, very welcome. We're very glad to have you guys
It's
here.
been lovely. Thank you so much.
Oh, our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Thanks so much to Sasha and her team for dropping by. We will, of course, donate the proceeds of this video to Conservation Without Borders. And if you can afford to do so, we'd love it if you supported them too. I'll add a link here and in the description. Thanks very much.